Welcome to the Mobile Workforce Podcast, where we sit down and have real conversations with business leaders that have been where you are. During these interviews, we'll dive into what it takes to improve systems and champion processes that maximize performance. Each week, our trailblazing guests share their experiences and understanding of the workforce to help inspire change, challenge our thinking, and share what it takes to successfully travel the road to profitability. Now here's our host, co-founder and chief evangelist of About Time and WorkMax, Mike Merrill.
Hello and welcome back to the Mobile Workforce Podcast. I am your host, Mike Merrill, and today we are excited to have the guest, Richard White, the founder and CEO of Fathom, a free Zoom app that records, transcribes, and highlights the key moments from your Zoom calls so you can focus on your conversation instead of having to take notes. So Richard's an expert on remote teams and how to build them and also keep them maintained. And today, Richard and I are going to dive into the process of making sure that you have your remote workers fully tied into your technology and also alignment with your culture for your greatest success. So thanks again for joining us today, Richard. Really looking forward to the conversation today.
Thanks for having me, Mike. I'm excited.
You bet. Awesome. So I guess just to start the conversation off, why do you think it's so important to look at those processes with your teams and your company, from a remote perspective?
Yeah, so my previous company, User Voice, started off as a remote company, shifted actually to being in person, and actually ended up in this hybrid situation. I think like a lot of folks ended up to. My most recent company, Fathom, was remote from the start and is still remote to this day. And I think there's just a vastly different set of ceremonies and processes you need if you go, everyone goes in the office versus everyone stays from home. And I think what I see a lot of is people not realize that it's a completely different kind of animal, and you kind of try to adapt. I see these companies that like got forced into remote during the pandemic, right, or into hybrid or something, and they kind of just tried to translate everything they did in person, right, into from a meeting perspective, from a process perspective, to remote, and it doesn't really work. You almost have to rethink it from first principles, and think about it differently when you're doing a remote company.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what's your take on this hybrid approach that a lot of companies are seeming to adopt as well?
I think hybrid's really tough because, what I had in my last company before everyone kind of did hybrid, it's like, some people go in some days, some people go in other days. I think it leads to a lot of tension because, it's like this ongoing negotiation between, I want to work from home 4 days a week. Well, I want to work from home 5 days a week. Oh, why does this person get to work from home on Wednesday and I have to go in, right? So I think there's a lot of tension around that. I feel like it's kind of the worst of both worlds because now you got to design processes that work for both, right? It's like, we're gonna have this meeting today. Half of us are here and half of us are at home, right? So it's probably like anything, like you have to be intentional about it, but I think it's probably the most complex outcome to a certain degree. And you almost have to build ceremonies where, it works for both. You have to be thoughtful, probably around creating consistency, right? I think a lot of people have done hybrid where it's like, this team comes in this days and these teams come in these days. But really, you probably want someone who's like, okay, we all come in Tuesday, Thursday, and thus we all do our in-person meetings there. And something where you have the same experience for everyone. I think it's probably whether it's in-person, remote, or hybrid, making sure you have like one consistent experience for everyone is something you can build around. If everyone has different experiences, now you've made the challenge of building processes around that so much harder.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to have a synergistic feel within a company when, you've got some people in, some people out. And again, that human nature of comparison or counting beans, so to speak, why do they get to work remote more often than I do or whatever. The comparison is the thief of all joy, as they say, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's also challenging because then you get people, it's like if you have one way of working, you can get in kind of a cadence and rhythm of doing it. But if it's like Monday I work from home, Tuesday I go in the office, and like you get, someone generally always going to prefer one or the other. So some group of people's really not going to like Tuesday, Thursday, or some groups really not going to like Monday, Wednesday, Friday where they have to work from home. And so I think it's just challenging, right? Again, I think the most important thing though is it's not really about the thing you choose. It's about really committing to whichever route you choose, right? If you've got some reasons where it's like, no, we really need hybrid, great. Then commit to that and build processes from scratch around that. I think, the real big differences are, can you rely on like ambient awareness for a lot of things, right? I think when you have a remote team, there's a lot of things there's kind of this blurred line between like work and home, right? Where you got people don't have this finite distinction between like, oh, now I'm working, now I'm not. And with the right culture, I think that's actually a benefit, right? People can kind of like build their lives around their work. With the wrong culture, they like, it goes the other direction. But the challenge with the remote is I don't know who's unhappy because I'm not seeing them throughout the day. Like they're kind of hidden. And I don't get ambient awareness, right? Like when you're in person, you actually don't realize how much ambient awareness you get of like, oh, I overheard so-and-so on the phone, or I heard so-and-so discussing this thing, right? There's just kind of this like natural organic spread of context. In a remote environment, there's zero organic spread of context. You have to build it all in. And I think that's, and if you have hybrid, you got to do a little bit of both.
Yeah, it's very hard to collaborate really in an effective way when some people are there, some people are not. It's just a different vibe, right? So are there some rules that you like to see in place for, it sounds to me like structure, like in a lot of processes and things within a company is very important. People can count on it. They're not hesitant. They're not trying to figure out, do I do this or do I do that? How do I approach this? How are other people approaching it? But what are some of those rules that you like to see in place for an environment where, they've elected to have a remote team?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's building the comms infrastructure. That's the most important thing, right? Because again, when you're in person, you kind of get this for free, or you get some version of it for free, right? Yes, you have meetings and presentations, all hands, right? But again, you get so much more data because you can see everyone's face and you can kind of hear the ambient stuff. So, I think a lot about, we're constantly building out, I think the challenge is, as CEO, you often have almost omnipotent, like you should have some level of quasi omnipotence about like what's happening across the org. And my goal is always like, how do I give each one of my teams as much of that omnipotence as I have, right? Because everyone does better when they have a lot of context in what they're doing. And so we focus a lot on building out a lot of Slack channels that give you various streams of communication, right? Like, okay, here's a stream of everyone, like, every sign up and cancellation and whatnot, right? Here's a stream of, every piece of positive product feedback. Here's a channel of every technical issue that our support team is dealing with. We basically end up and we almost have to remake these as the org scale. So every time you hit, you go from 10 people to 25, 50, you have to always be rethinking these. These are almost every ceremony, every standing meeting, every like channel you have in Slack. I almost think you have to rethink about it. You have to like revisit every 6 to 12 months and say, is this still helping us? Is this still providing important context for our org? And that's, the constant thing. It's like, how do I sanity check that my team knows all the things they need to know in order to like know where they should be spending their time? And so I spent a lot of time building out Slack channels and also building a culture of asynchronous communication. Because I think a lot of folks are just used to, hey, let's grab a meeting and like talk about it. Or, hey, Mike, I passed you in the hall. Like, oh, I meant to tell you this thing, right? You have to build a culture of async communication, which is we get used to passing around documents and letting everyone comment that on their own time. And then we schedule a meeting. Right? We schedule the meeting to discuss the thing, not to communicate the thing.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I like, we use Slack here internally. I like your focus on technology to bring things together. One tool, I don't know if you commonly recommend this one, but we've been using those Slack huddles quite a bit. And that's really nice when there's something, okay, we got to quickly collaborate. And even within our building, my partners and I, or different people on the team, even though they're just down the hall, sometimes to not disrupt people that are in the middle of something else, it's like, hey, let's just have a quick huddle here. And, it's not as disruptive of everybody moving their machine into a conference room and going through those types of things. So
100%. Yeah, we use this a lot. There's a lot of there's discussion happening on Slack. Hey, let's all just jump on a huddle. Everyone seems free and talk this out for 5 minutes, right? And then there's kind of, then as opposed to booking a 30-minute meeting and bothering everyone for 25 minutes more than we need to, like a week from now, let's just knock it out right now. Absolutely.
Love that. So are there, within those rules, are there things that are absolute no-nos? Are there things you would really warn people against allowing or having be a part of an accepted process in those types of environments?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm kind of a stickler about and I'm just alluded to this, meetings are for discussion, not content delivery. Right. Okay. And I think that's, it's very tempting to be like, oh, I've got something I want to share with everyone. I'm going to invite 10 people to this meeting, and we're going to spend half an hour where I just kind of walk through a pitch deck and tell you all these things. And it's like, oh, that's not a great use of everyone's time, right? Because some people can consume that in 10 minutes. Some people only need to see the back half of that, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my big one. We use Fathom for some of the stuff too, right? So the current app is like a free app, records your meetings, transcribes them, highlights them, summarizes them, right? And so you can imagine both for customer meetings as well as internal meetings, we'll record them. So maybe someone can't make it because there's a conflict. Great. We don't have to wait till everyone's free to have this meeting. We'll have it with 70% of the people, and we'll tag the people. If something came up and Tim needed to know about it, hey, Tim, here's the clip from that meeting you needed to see, right? And so taking things that are even historically synchronous, like meetings, and also be able to make those asynchronous, right? Hey, if anyone, people are out sick yesterday, okay, well, here's all hands if you want to see the all hands, right? And people listen to it like 1.3 speed while they're working on something else, right? So basically, I think synchronous communication is like the most overhead thing you have in your business, right? And by synchronous, I mean like everyone has to be there at the same time. And so I constantly just like, especially as you get bigger, how do we turn everything as much as possible async, right? Whether it's carving up meeting recordings, whether it's sending out docs ahead of time, whether it's, yada, yada. And then I think it's creating a vented awareness of if this event happened, make sure it alerts the right people, right? And so people don't have to basically be monitoring things. They get basically pushed content when they need to know about it.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great rule. One, we could do a better job probably following it internally here, where again, you've got 10 people sitting there around a screen for 30 minutes, listening to someone read their slides, or, it's like I could have looked at the whole thing in 2 minutes and probably gotten as much out of it without spending the extra 28 listening to it, right?
Yep. Amazon does a good job of this, right? I'm not familiar. So Amazon has a rule where every big high level meeting, you basically have to prepare a 6-page memo for it.
Oh, wow.
And you like as a certain format, 6-page memo. And it's not expected they have an interesting thing because they figure people get booked so much, they don't expect that people will read the memo before. So if you book an hour-long meeting with a bunch of execs, everyone's going to spend the first 10 minutes reading your 6-page memo. And then you have the meeting. So that's like an interesting kind of hybrid version, right, of like what I was saying. But it's important because I think it takes I think when you're thinking about communication, the easiest thing, if I'm trying to communicate something to 10 of my colleagues, the easiest thing for me is to schedule 30 minutes and just make a short deck, and I can talk through what's in my head, right? That's what's best for me. That's not what's best for the other 9 people in that meeting, right? What's best for the 9 people in the meeting is I actually spend an hour writing up a thoughtful, like 6-page memo, if you were, 3-page memo, sharing it with all 9 of them. And now we could probably they could probably read it, and we can have a discussion in half the time that it would take for me to present it all to you, right? And I think that's the big idea, is that like, you should think about whose time is more valuable. And so I'm constantly saying like, I don't want to waste my entire team's time giving them an all hands when I could just do it asynchronously and they can consume it in between other things, right?
Yeah, I love that. So again, just the math in my brain, I'm thinking, okay, so one person who has the idea, who gets the whole thing, maybe they spend an extra hour, but it saves 5 man hours by doing that versus eating up everybody's time, right? 10 man hours or 11, one to prepare and then 10 people to go through it for an hour.
That's right. And I think that's the bias everyone has. Because again, it's better for me. It's easier for me just to get there, do that meeting, right? And so we don't really think about this math, but that is the price you're paying, right? In a remote environment, it's even more insidious, I think, because there's just tendency to over-invite people to meetings because you don't have the stampede awareness. Everyone's like, oh, well, Tim needed to know that there's 5 minutes from that hour-long meeting last week that Tim needed to know about. Let's make sure Tim is on this meeting. And now Tim is stuck there for an entire hour, right? There's another interesting thing that I saw before around meetings. I don't know if you're familiar with like Wolfram Alpha. It's like this very cool kind of like alternate search engine. Been around for like 30 years. They did Mathematica. Cool software company. The guy who runs it, Stephen Wolfram, is a total like productivity nerd. He has like these blog posts about him like going on walks in the woods while his laptop's on his chest or whatever. It's crazy. But they've been doing remote work for like 25 years before anyone ever did it. And they have an interesting strategy where when they do have meetings, and they don't have a ton, I don't think, but when they do have meetings, they enforce video off. which is kind of unique, right? Normally you think, oh, I want to see everyone, right? They enforce video off. And the reason they enforce video off is because he actually empowers all those people to like half pay attention to the meeting. He kind of realized, he said at some point, he's like, I realize I can't fight the meeting inflation. Invariably, people get invited to a meeting and they really only are like only 10% of that meeting's relevant to them. And it's hard to get people, it's hard to like create a culture where people can just say no to meetings or just decide to leave in the middle or like only show up for part of it, right? So he said, instead, I trust my team enough that I'm fine with them writing emails and listening with one ear if they know this is a meeting where they're usually not super engaged. And I think that's a really interesting strategy, right? Where you trust your team enough to be like, okay, we know we're gonna over-invite people to meetings. Let's at least give them the ability to kind of like, let's not shame them. Let's not turn on the camera and everyone's got to stare and like make sure that it looks like they're paying attention, right? Let's just own it, right? Or have a conversation. So I thought that's an interesting strategy as well.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I think one of the things we've used it on the podcast, at least this term, a few times, but the unintended consequences. And it's like, if you're going to look for a silver lining in the COVID pandemic and some of the things that we've gone through, is we were forced to do certain things quickly because we were stuck. We were a deer in the headlights for a while, trying to adjust and adapt. And then I think we've probably overcorrected and maybe gone too far the other way. And now everybody's trying to get back in the middle. I saw last night, there was an article up in Seattle, Washington. All of these hundreds of Amazon employees are protesting because Amazon's making them come back to work. They want to work remote still, and they're not happy about having to go back to the office. And so there's this subculture of, hey, we can do just as well from home, but we want that flexibility and this sort of employee empowerment, which again, maybe individuals feel that's better for them. But, as a company owner, I have to question, what's the motive? If you're unwilling to come here, there's probably some other reason than just, sheer convenience. So how do we get back in the middle? And then, what do we do from a technology standpoint to make sure that if we have disruptions like this again, that we're in a better place to handle those as they come without majorly disrupting everything in our business?
Yeah, you're right. There were a lot of people doing remote companies before the pandemic. Well, not a lot, right? There were some, right? But it wasn't by far not mainstream, right? And, my last company, we were remote in 2009, right? Fully remote, which a while ago. I think, yeah, and if you looked at the surveys during the pandemic or like after people, I think the big thing is it gave a bunch of people who had never done remote work from home a chance to do it. And then people found out whether they like it or not. And I think the way they surveyed people, they found like a third of people really liked it, a third of people hated it, and a third of people wanted a bit of both, which is a really challenging place to be in. It means your average large company now has, no matter what you choose, 2/3 of people are not going to be happy, right? You choose hybrid, the fully office, and so I think it's actually an advantage though now for you if you're a growing company to kind of figure out which of those models works for you as a management team, as a business, right? And I think again, certain businesses certain management teams prefer certain things, and I think that's fine. I prefer working remote, and then it's nice that I can then filter by, I find we only hire people that like working remote, and they know we're going to stay working remote, right? And so I think that's the thing. It's like you're probably going to have to let go of all the people that really want. If you want to have hybrid or really want to have in person, you've got a bunch of people now that are really addicted to working remotely or working from home. You're going to have to probably let them go and find people that want to. That's now a core part of your culture is we go into the office, right? And we see each other. And so I think it's a, what they call a great sort, right? Everyone's just kind of resorting into different companies. I think it's just kind of like it's a period we'll have to go through where people are like, there's always this chaos whenever these things happen. Everyone kind of resort themselves. And now I think we're kind of seeing that, right? And people are kind of gravitating towards the types of roles they want to work.
Yeah. And I think as we've looked, even here in our software company, we've been around about 20 years. And in my memory, we've almost always had more than one, multiple remote engineers, and whether they're onshore or offshore, we've always had people writing code for our company that were not in our physical office. And that has seemed to work a lot better than maybe remote salespeople for one reason or another. And I know, I lean more towards the sales part of the business. and the operations side, then I'm not a programmer. And so even in a technology company, my role is kind of on the other side of the house. But I always have been a proponent, and I feel it's better for myself too. I want to be able to walk down the hall and poke my head in somewhere. I want someone to come and knock, come to my door jamb and knock on it and get 30 quick seconds to solve something instead of multiple emails, multiple back and forth, multiple Slacks, sometimes unanswered for 2 or 5 or 7 minutes while someone's really being ineffective waiting for a reply. It's like, man, if you could just take 30 seconds and walk down the hall, it's just so much more efficient. So when companies have decided, they're going to have a hybrid approach, or they have different roles that have a different schedule or a different rule set, what are some red flags that you can identify or point out to people to watch for when, certain situations are not really working out well for the company when someone's remote?
Yeah. And I think, so on top of like getting a lot of alerts and Slack things, we also try to set up a lot of systems that, try to basically try to get that bottom up feedback, right? I think a lot of what I've talked about is kind of top down. How do you communicate top down context, right, about what's happening in the business? People can do their jobs. But there's this other thing where you've got a bubble bottom up. Where are people not being empowered? Like where are people like, gosh, I'm always waiting on this answer from Mike because he's never available, and like he's on because I can't walk down the hall to knock on his office anymore, right? How often does that happen? Is that frustrating? Like, do you feel socially isolated at home and stuff like that? So I think one part is this, you have to build this into your cadence of like managerial review, but we've also done a lot of stuff with like kind of automated surveys, right? Even in Slack, we use this thing called like Geekbot, and asks you questions of like, what are you working on today? And you also ask like, you can ask ones that are more personal, like, hey, what have you been frustrated with? How happy are you this week versus last week? And so I think, again, I think there's 2 big challenges with remote. One is that like, you don't get ambient awareness of frame. People can't walk down the hall. You can't hear the frustration in people's voices, right? And the second thing is you might have a bunch of people that are like super melancholy and like working from home but kind of not feeling great. You never know, because on text message, Slack message, you can't tell, right? And so I think the red flag there is having some system. I've also used tools like Office 5 or 15.5, or you can build some Geekbot, something that kind of is like an automated service that's telling you, oh, like some percentage of folks are, deeply unhappy, or they're just frustrated, right? And maybe it's because they're stuck at home. Maybe it's because they're stuck at home with their kids and their dog, and they actually like going to work because they like having a little space from that. Maybe it's that they're frustrated because they can't get the answers to the questions that they used to be able to get in person, right? But I think it's really important to have some way to like take the temperature of the room, because you can't do that anymore just by like, used to be you could just scan out, you could just, everyone sits down on the lunch table occasionally, you could tell who's frustrated. Like, it's so obvious, right, if you're paying attention. And that's the thing you lose. I think that's the thing I've thought a lot about recently, because I've occasionally run into situations where I have some engineer, have someone's like, oh yeah, I've been like really upset. I've been really frustrated and burned out for like 3 months. I'm like, I had no idea. Your Slack messages didn't change, right? Like, so I think that's the biggest red flag I worry about, is like just overall employee satisfaction. And are you aware of it in an environment where you never see their face and you never hear their tenor of their voice?
Yeah, we've all probably sent or received a text message on our cell phone that made us feel one way and was absolutely intended a complete opposite, right? Sometimes from something really positive and happy to, man, this person is very upset at me right now. And it's all in your head, right? Because all you ever go by is the text and how you're deciding to receive it, right?
That's a great point. Yeah. That is the other danger of the remote stuff, is like things can get easily misinterpreted. Like tone is hard to basically, it is very much subjective in the eye of the beholder, right? And if someone's having a bad day, they might read your Slack message a different way, and now you've got some problem you didn't know you had, right? So you need some sort of processes that, I think, it's good to have both, right? Automated processes, as well as just kind of a general, like, you got someone on your team empowered to be checking in on folks and seeing how they're doing. And, I've often had like office managers or folks play this role almost like the ombudsman that's like kind of saying, hey, hey, executive team, I'm hearing a lot of like scuttlebutt on the ground about this or that, right? And like, because again, you lose it when you're not in the office.
Yeah, that's a great point. So you've mentioned the term a couple of times, and it kind of caught my ear. You've talked about the term ceremony, or reviewing the ceremony. What does that mean to you, and why are you using that term in describing some of what Fathom does?
Yeah, it's a good question. I use that term instead of like meetings because what are meetings? A lot of these meetings are ceremonies. It's like we're acknowledging something, we're celebrating something, we are, handling something. And so I use certain words to get me out of the mental construct of like, oh, it's a meeting, right? No, like this is an intentional ceremony we have. Like we have an all hands. It's actually, what's the all hands? It's actually a ceremony every week to like celebrate what we've done well and also to like share context about where we're going, right? And also you realize like some ceremonies don't have to be meetings. Some ceremonies could be like, oh, like every Friday we post, this week's stats, right? Or like, here's a thing into the announcement channel. So, I just tend to think about a ceremony because I think it gives you a slightly, it like makes your brain think about it a little bit harder and realize it doesn't have to be a meeting.
Yeah. Well, ceremony to me, it's like, it's with intention or maybe reverence or respect, or it's just a different level of focus than a meeting. A meeting can easily have a negative connotation. Ceremony usually never would. It's something that you're looking forward to going to, right?
Yeah, and I think it also speaks to the fact that sometimes you're communicating things for the sake of sharing that information. Sometimes you're communicating things for the ceremony of celebrating it and like talking, like, so sometimes we will do things which are, content delivered via a ceremony, right? Where it's like, oh, again, let's call out that Tim did a great job last week and all hands, whatnot, right? And some of that stuff works better as a ceremony, as a thing we all get together and do, as opposed to me just shoot off an email or shooting a Slack message, like, Tim did a great job last week, everyone give him a high five, right? Like people still like the ceremony of hearing their name called out, kind of being surprised by it in front of their colleagues and stuff like that. So I just like to think about the business is a series of processes and ceremonies, and like you can't have too many of either one of these, right? Each one of these has like a maintenance cost to it. So you can't have too many, and you should think that we only have as many ceremonies, as many processes as we need. And we constantly reevaluate them and say, are they still serving us?
Love that. So I guess to go back to the very beginning of the conversation, so why Fathom? I mean, what is it about? What drove you to be where you're at there and help create what you're doing there today? What's the passion behind that, and what are you really trying to help companies or people enjoy that maybe they weren't before you were involved with this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was at my last company doing a lot of like Zoom calls with customers, right? And asking questions, trying to learn more about how we could improve our product, improve our service. And I found those conversations both very gratifying and also extremely frustrating. Gratifying because it's great to learn all these things and talk to customers, whatnot. Frustrating because I'm like trying to take notes at the same time, right? Like hurriedly like pack out, oh, what did Mike say? And, oh, that was a really interesting thing from Mike. And oh, I can't wait to share this with my team, but I gotta quote him exactly right, sort of thing. And the whole process of like trying to talk to someone, taking notes at the same time is just like supremely frustrating, right? It's like very stressful. And then I also would notice that a lot of times I come back to those notes 2 weeks later and be like, I don't remember exactly which meeting this was or what exactly Mike said that I was so hyped up about 2 weeks ago. And even more problematically, I talk a lot about context, right? Sharing context with your team. It's one part of the content, but it's also the emotion, right? If I'm talking to you and you're a customer and you're like, oh man, Rich, I'm loving what's happening with this new feature you guys built at Fathom. If I share with the rest of the team, hey, Mike's really excited about this feature with Fathom, then everyone's kind of like, okay, fine. It's like not the same experience as me hearing you say, Rich, I'm loving this product. And so I looked at both sides of that. And I remember I also ran our sales team and I kept reading all their notes, trying to understand what the conversations they were having with prospects and being really frustrated. Like most people don't write good notes. They're either like too little or too verbose. And even when they wrote good ones, I was like, yeah, but what does this person actually say when they said they're going to buy or they have this pricing concern, right? And so all of this were the reasons where I'm like, oh my gosh, we're now at a point where you could build a really good system that just joins all your meetings, records them in real time, transcribes them, summarizes them. And so now I don't have to take notes. When I go meet with people, I go like watch the previous meeting I had with them, read the summary. Oh, I remember that call with Mike. When I hear something awesome, I grab that clip and I throw it on our Slack. Like, oh, I just got this. Mike's loving the product. Hey guys, check out his response. And everyone watches it. And so it's just a different way to work. And it's one of these fun products where like you build it to scratch your own itch and then it changes the way you work. And then you just like, I want to bring this to more people. Right. I don't even try. I try to avoid in-person meetings now because when I meet with you in person, I don't have Fathom, and then I'm going to not remember anything, right? Like, oh, and I'm going to take notes and all this stuff. And so I prefer remote meetings now because the Fathom can join, and it's a lot less stress. Like, oh, I missed something you said. No worries. I'll go back and watch it later. Or like you say something really smart, I want to share it with my team. Great. I can do that too. And so it's just a fundamentally, I think, a very different shift from the note. I think once you pay attention to you guys, a lot of our information infrastructure is these old scraps of paper notes passing everywhere. And they just really are a lot less impactful than the right 20-second clip.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And you get the tone, you get the emotion, the zest that somebody has if you need it, right?
Yep. Especially, I mean, you're running sales teams, so you get this, right? Like, tone is everything in sales, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
sure.
My team of salespeople have happy ears. They tend to hear what they want to hear. They're, oh yeah, this person's going to buy. They're loving it. You go back and watch the last 2 minutes of that negotiation, and you're like, they're not loving it. They just said that to placate you. I can tell.
They're letting you down easy.
Yeah, exactly.
Beautiful. Well, that's awesome. I love hearing those stories. That's how our product was created. I think all of the best products are created by people that are trying to solve their own problem and figure out that nobody else in the market's really done it the right way or the way that they feel like it should be done. And so, things like that are built with passion and purpose and really to, resolve pain and make people's lives easier. So congratulations on coming up with something so useful and also timing it with technology to be able to really enjoy the benefits of what you're doing and leverage those resources and tools that are out there today that can help us make our lives easier.
100%. Yeah. It's so gratifying to work on something that is your own problem. Right.
Well, love that. Well, I highly encourage the listeners to check out Fathom and learn more about what they're doing and how it might be able to help you in your business. And thank you so much, Reg, for joining us today. It's been a really fun conversation.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, Mike.
You bet. All right. We'll catch with you later.
Thank you for joining us today on the Mobile Workforce Podcast, sponsored by About Time Technologies and WorkMax. If you liked the conversation we had today or were able to learn anything new or helpful, please make sure to follow us on our WorkMax page on LinkedIn and on Instagram at WorkMax_. And subscribe to the show on iTunes or your preferred podcast platform so you will never miss another insightful episode. Also, if you enjoyed the podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating and review and share the show with your friends and colleagues. Your support means the world to us and will allow us to continue providing impactful information with others looking to improve their results in their business and, in turn, their life.